Well, it's the chance for us to welcome another guest to the OHL podcast as requested by you. Tyler sent the email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com, says, you got to get Brian Drumm on the show, the only guy to play in seven OHL seasons. Now, this isn't like high school where you get held back or anything. Brian Drumm is with us. Drummy, thanks for making the time.
But you know what? I had somebody bring that up, and then not too long ago, the same idea of the many years, and I kind of said it's like being in grade 8 for three or four repeats. But really, it happened that many years probably went by, and I was able to bounce in and out of them probably because I started so early. And when you start at 14, right away you're ahead of most people. They're going to play 4 or 5 years, and then when Vancouver sent me back in my overage year, that gets to 7. So.
But you said something there that I think catches a lot of people's ears. It's one thing if you look up Brian Drumm's stats and you see the 7 seasons, but you just said at the age of 14 you played your first Ontario Hockey League game. That's not something that happens anymore. How did that happen for you back then?
Well, back then, Mike, Toronto was always dominating. You had the Marlies. They always seemed to be such a good team. And the reason for it is they were able to protect 7 players from your own city. So Kitchener could protect 7 minor players. Marlies would pick 7. But kind of an unfair situation when you got all of Toronto to pick from or all of Oshawa to pick from. I mean, luckily we had a real good midget team, probably one of the best midget teams in the country. Well, we were one of the best in the world, actually, because we won the big tournament overseas. But so 7 of us real good players were protected. So when they run into injury problems, Gus Bodner was the coach at the time. And I think Gus really, he watched some of the kids playing, but not really. So he saw this big kid that was scoring lots on a midget team, had no idea what the ages of the kids were, thought everybody's 15 or at least 16. He had no idea I was only 14 years old until after the game. And this goes to tell you how long ago it was. It was a sports writer from the Toronto Telegram came up to him after the game and said, it's pretty bad when the Oshawa Generals have to play a 14-year-old to make out their lineup. And he was as dumbfounded as anybody. He had no idea what the guy was talking about. So they were able to bring me up without, there's no waivers, nothing to do with the draft, because we were protected players and we were part of that minor system in Oshawa. So when the draft came around in my draft year, well, naturally, they didn't even have to draft me then. They just protected 7 kids, the best 7 kids in that area, in their area. And I was lucky enough to fall into that. So I ended up getting a record that nobody can really beat. It's kind of funny, actually, but all because my coach, and I don't think he would have brought me up if he knew I was only 14 years old.
Well, it also gives you the distinction of not only holding that mark, but ahead of some other guys that we might be thinking about, no offense, but ahead of Brian Drumm. I'm thinking specifically of names like Wayne Gretzky and Bobby Orr.
Well, it's funny because, I had some ties with Rick Kornacki, and he got hired by General Motors to run the Safe and Fun Hockey School. And naturally, Bobby Orr was a spokesman for the new van release and was the big draw on the ice. And we brought kids from all over Ontario, some special needs, some they didn't have to pay to go to this. It was a big promo thing. Cassie Campbell did the girls' side. And I got a chance to sit with Bobby for, every day, every morning we were on the ice. And he chirped me nonstop about that 14-year-old thing, made me buy coffee because I'd beaten that record. And he just thought it would never be beat. And now it can't be. I mean, Tavares came real close, drafted as a 14-year-old, but luckily the Generals had their first game in September. So he was 15 when he got to play and not 14. So it's interesting. Keep looking back at it, and it's. I know one of the guys from the north, Randy Russin, did an article last summer, and I was doing some work up north in the pipeline stuff, and he did the Gretzky thing because when Wayne came to Peterborough, he got to play with myself and Keith Crowder. We were the two guys were supposed to protect him for the couple of games he was going to play, and Wayne was only 15. So unfortunately, the only team he never scored for was the games he played with us. And we kind of kid about that because that's probably why he didn't score, because he had us on his wing with him.
It was all your fault, Drummy.
Yeah. I scored, and I know Crowd scored, but Wayne didn't. He picked up, I think, 3 assists in the 3 games, and then you go down the road, and years later, when the hockey's all done, and we're coaching kids, and I had Darren McCarty with me in Peterborough, and Darren's living with me in Peterborough, and who does he get drafted by is Belleville, and guess who the first pick that year was Brent, like Wayne's younger brother, and it was a Mr. Gretzky who doesn't forget anything, cornered me in the hallway, and he said, "It's kind of funny how you played with Wayne in his first OHL game, and this kid that lives with you is going to play with Brent." I says, "I can't believe you remember that." And never said a word about not getting any goals. So I was waiting for that one, but small world.
You mentioned that it was yours and Crowder's job to kind of protect the 15-year-old kid Gretzky when he was going to play those games for the Petes. Is that really what the message was from the coach? Like, just make sure you keep an eye on that guy and he doesn't get himself hurt out there?
Well, when we seen him in the dressing room, Mike, I mean, I said, "You got to be kidding me." And I had seen Wayne play in Adam and stuff when we were in tournaments around Toronto and Brampton and stuff, and we had our Oshawa teams there. And I thought, oh, I mean, this kid doesn't weigh 150 pounds. I mean, but Gary Green was our coach, and he just said, "We're playing Burt Templeton in the Hamilton Finn Cups in the first game, so they're going to take a shot at him. He's dominating the Junior B League with Seneca, and that was our affiliate. We had the opportunity to bring him up, and Stuart Smith, Billy Gardner came up, so we had numerous kids off that team get a chance to play with us when we went under our roster number. But pretty much, he said, just make sure." That he's looked at it. And Wayne kind of came to us and said, "Don't worry about me. Don't watch me." And that was the biggest thing. He says, "Don't watch what I do. You guys do your thing. You go to the net, you try and get me pucks. I'll try and get you pucks." And he got us pucks that, I mean, if we had any talent, we would have scored. We would have scored a hatful. Like, he was setting us up left and right, and it just kept going on and on. You couldn't hit him, and he just had that elusive extra eye, or he knew where you were, and there was no issues. We did score. Unfortunately, he didn't. And I remember my dad telling me at the one face-off, they had a picture of us all lined up at a face-off. He said, "You better save that picture. That could be a good collectible down the road." And then the rest is history. I mean, no one knew that he was going to go on to do, what he did in the world of hockey. So.
Absolutely incredible. Almost as incredible as being that 14-year-old kid. And I'm just curious what that's like. So there you are playing midget in Oshawa. You're doing well, obviously, but you've got some sort of routine. You must be grade 9, I'm guessing. And so
I was in grade 9, and I was at the Catholic school, so we had to wear the shirt and ties. And I get a phone call at 9:30 in the morning. Our principal at that school was a guy by the name of Jack Cole. And we had Father Paul Woodcroft there. Woodcroft was with the Flying Fathers, and that's Jay Woodcroft's uncle, who's with Edmonton now. So, but Jack called me into the office, and I figured I'm in trouble for some sort of violation with it, because I didn't have a tie or something. And he said, "You're going home right now because you're going to play. I think they want you to play tonight in Toronto." And I said, no, we don't have any games this week. And I figured he's talking about our midget team. He said, "No, you got to call your dad right now." And Gus had called, and they were playing the Marlies. Billy Lohead and Rick Middleton were both hurt, but they were going to play. So the deal was, I would play the defensive side of the shift, and they would play the offensive side of the shift. So we're flipping off back and forth. My first shift was against the Shutt Harris Gardner line. I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" The best line in junior hockey in Canada. And then I got to shadow Paul and Bordelot for the rest of the game. So one thing I could do, I could skate. I was a good skater. And I was big. So there was no chance of me really getting hurt. But at one face-off, I remember George Ferguson, and he's from down where we live now, and he kind of kids about it when we run into each other, spears me right off the face-off, because he said, what are you doing, kid? You're Bantam or something? And I never really paid attention to it, but the next day we go into London, and now everybody knows I'm 14. They're not allowing me to play. London had Dave Hutchison and Babcock, and they were a really good team too. So you had Oshawa, the Marlies, and London, but London was tough. So they put me in the press box, and I'm with Bob Burr and Jim Gilchrist, and they're doing a big interview because now they found out that this is some sort of record. And Wayne Daniels, who is our not GM trainer, then he's waving his arms down there, and Bob Burr says, "I think they want you." Two guys got sick in the warm-up, so I got to play. And the thing they were afraid of when you're that young, you're just not smart enough to be afraid of anybody that's real tough. And that happened because I run into, I don't know, Lou Nistico or somebody, knocked him down, and Hutchison came after me, and we had, I think Mike Amodia was our tough guy, had to jump in. So two or three of our older guys had to fight because I was there. And I got off the ice and got to the bench, didn't even know anything was going on. But when you're that young, you just don't get it. You want to get into that rink and get out real quiet. And I'm having a riot out there running at guys, and they're just, no, don't be doing that here.
You mentioned Tavares, and I wanted to ask about that because obviously he was one of the exceptional players into the Ontario Hockey League at 15. How do you feel about the exceptional status that's still being granted this year just now to Michael Misa?
You know what? So far, I think they've been dead on with most of them. I think the big guy that played, the big defenseman there, might have been the only exception, but even he looked real good early. Tavares is phenomenal. I mean, I'm a big Leaf fan, and I love John Tavares' 200-foot game. I love how he's the captain of that team. And it's funny because in this area is where his in-laws are from, and the one brother-in-law used to bug him all the time saying, you know what, he's going to play in Toronto, is he? He said, no, he'll never play there. He's such a private guy. He likes to have his space. And I'm going, yeah, he's going to play here. Next thing I know, I hear him on the phone, and he comes in. He said, my sister just got hired at Mississauga General Hospital. I go, I don't believe it. He's coming here. He is. The next day they announced it. So kind of funny. And I don't know. I mean, I think, the McDavid, I mean, what can you say about him? Like maybe one of the best player in the world right now. I know there's some big kids that 14 and 15, there's a big deal there. That 1 year, I think it makes a big difference. I was able to probably survive at that age because of my size, and I could skate. Did I have the mental ability or really the talent to play in that league at that age? No, not at all. But for a couple games here and there, I could more than fill in. And how you judge that is my first year as a 16-year-old. I mean, I went back to midget, scored 70 or 80 goals. We won the All-Ontario. We won the World Midget Championship. My first full year in the OHL, I got 9 goals. Like that was because I can remember my dad. Like, he's just going. He said, "Well, you know what? It's a big deal when you got to play the full year and you play on that fourth line, no power plays. You don't get extra anything. You earn everything you get. But if you can't score at least 20 next year, you're going to school." So, and a couple other things have to change too. But and I end up with 26 or 27. So I go, whew, I'm saved.
I can keep playing hockey, no more studying.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, you're right. He had me going to the States. So, and then, the OHL NCAA thing didn't even exist. You could play and then take off and go there. Now there's no way. I mean, you got all these set rules, and then the OHL has come around and done a great job of creating their own school program, which keeps a lot of kids here now too. So,
as a Leafs fan, Brian, what was it like playing for the legendary Gus Bodnar, the former Maple Leaf, obviously your coach in Oshawa?
Yeah, I love Gus, Mike. I mean, for some reason, him and I, because he had me there as a 14-year-old, so he started to like me early. A lot of guys that I grew up in town with that ended up we had 6 off that midget team play on the Generals all the way through for the 4 years they were there, and didn't like them because they didn't get the good deal with the ice, and they blamed him for a lot. But he was old school. Like, I mean, he could tell stories like that we wouldn't even know who these people are he's talking about because we're not very old. But he was old school, same practice every day, same breakout every day. And then talk about the old NHL when he played, and he was so laid back. He never got too excited. I mean, it was. You got to remember that was probably a lot of fun for him to come back in and be around young guys like us. But there's some guys that really flourished there, like Middleton and Billy Lohead, and these guys. We had some really, Lee Fogelin. We got Lee Fogelin because Gus was best friends with Lee's dad. They both played in the NHL together. So like holy geez.
What were some of the stories like? What kinds of stories would he tell?
Well, the big thing with them is their trips and stuff. When they'd go into Detroit, and there'd be riots going on in Detroit, and they got to play a game, and they're sneaking out to get their beer and their vodka and their drinks and stuff. But they all had this camaraderie, like in that old, like he said, in that old 6-team NHL. Everybody knew everybody. You knew who the next group were that were going to come in. There was a respect layer there for everybody because they knew how hard it was to stay there, right? And never thinking that, I listened to Ralphie when he tells jokes at his golf tournaments, and he says, "Well, I never made the NHL because there was only 32 teams when I came out." Like, so this is talking about 6 teams, and remember, he was rookie of the year in the NHL his first year. Like he was a player. But the creativeness of the game that's there now, the analytics, you didn't even know what that word meant back then. It was old schools, chip it out, chip it in, and you got positioned to shoot or score, and you had to learn that on your own. There was nothing like the teaching that's out there now with video and different coaches, and it's unbelievable the change. But the stories were, tell you, it still comes back to that grit, that heart. And you play hurt, banged up. I mean, there's no missing games because you were injured unless you broke a bone. So
I get the sense, and I've heard some rumblings that you weren't far different from that, Drummy. If you were banged up, you were still taping it up and getting back out there.
Well, I think I tried to do that. I can remember Bud Stefanski. He was our captain, and Buddy. I got like him and Paul Harrison. We got both these guys out of a juvenile program in Timmins, and Buddy's our captain. He get cut up really bad in our first training camp. Him and Terry O'Reilly tangled because we had the pro guys skating with us, and he missed one shift and come back out. He had like 9 stitches in his face, and I'm going like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, this guy, he looks like a little girl. He's tough as nails. But he said, "What are you doing?" And I had been out with a groin injury. And I said, "Well, I got the groin injury." He says, "Yeah, and we're going into Hamilton to play Hamilton tonight in downtown Hamilton in that dumpy little rink. And we're going to get beat up, and you're going to sit in the seats and watch." He said, "Go get your stuff. At least you can sit on the bench." So I go in, pack my stuff, and our trainer goes like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, Bud says I'm bringing my stuff. I got to sit on the bench." So you're going to play. And then my first shift on the ice, sure enough, I get into it with, I don't know, it was one of their crazy guys they had. I'm not even sure which guy it was. And I'm in getting stitched up. And there's Bird in there, and he's got to come through the medical room to go talk to those guys. And he stops and looks at me. And he knows that he says, "We didn't count on seeing you in the game tonight." But he said, "Just remember, you're going to have to fight a game probably before you get out of here." And I'm just going, "Oh, jeez." But that's the way it was. I mean, we had that group of leaders on that team that were old school, and you weren't missing the game in there because of a groin injury. So, but
that makes me think to your connection to Darren McCarty, and you already mentioned him, and I know I'm skipping way ahead in the timeline here, but you're at the time in Peterborough coaching, and you get to know Darren McCarty, who ended up living with you. I know he eventually gets drafted by Belleville, but how did that relationship form, and what did you see, Drummy, in a young Darren McCarty?
Well, you got to remember, I had him and myself and Kirk Bowman from Leamington were coaching a travel team for Can-Am, because we always worked Can-Am hockey schools out of Guelph. That was our whole thing in the summer when we were growing up. And Darren joined into that one travel team we had. And really, it was called an elite travel team. We had players that could hardly skate, and you'd travel around and play different OHL teams and their draft picks. So you go into Belleville, and we'd play Mushy and Chapman and all these guys that were 19-year-olds and tough guys in the OHL. And then the next night you'd play another team, and they'd be on that team again, and they just beat you up. But Darren was only 15, and man, he fought a couple times. Had never done that before, he said. I said, "Are you kidding me? You never fought before?" And that's the way you can handle yourself. But he stood up as a tough kid. And he was already committed to Strathroy. So the parents traveled with us the whole 2 weeks he was with us, and I had just gotten the junior B job in Peterborough, and they hadn't won a game. The year before, they tied 1 game out of 40. So my assistant coach at the time was Mike Posavad, and he says, you know what, we should take that team, because we had the midgets. We were coaching the midgets. He said, we can improve by 100% by winning 1 game. So
he has nowhere to go but up.
That's our aim, to win 1 game. And he said, yeah, we can win 1 by mistake. So that's what we did. And that travel team, I kept telling Darren, I said, you should come and play. I mean, you're going to get lots of ice. Like, we don't have anybody. We don't usually billet players or anything, but we can maybe figure something out. So this went on. And the parents, they said, thank you so much. But we got a bond. There was a bond between us that summer somehow. And I don't know, 3rd day of training camp, someone comes to the dressing room door, said, the McCartys are here to see. I go, what? Because I had told my coaches about this kid, and he wanted to play. The plan wasn't that he lived with me, but that ended up the way it went, and it worked out for the most part. And, draft night, Peterborough was taken. I mean, that was a given. Like Dick and Jeff, they had 2 or 3 picks in the 4th round, and he was rated in the 7th. He had a good year in B, 20 goals, 25 assists. And as a coach, I controlled his points pretty much. I made sure every game sheet was filled out. There was no assists missing. I made sure at the end of a game, I said, Darren, you might need a couple penalty minutes here. He'd go out and get a couple, but he was balanced all the way through. His skating was improving. He was starting to turn into maybe a future pro. And I saw things in him that, I guess if you're around him, you would see. We had a real bad ice storm one night, and I came home from work in Oshawa, and I couldn't even park 2 streets away from where our farm was. And when I got out of my car, it rolled off the side of the street and into the ditch. And then I had to go through the ditch to get home. So he gets up in the morning, and I said, you might as well go back to bed. You get to miss school today, thinking, oh, this kid's going to be real happy, because he would miss every chance he got. But no, he said, I'm going to class. And I said, Darren, there's been like an ice storm for like 8 hours. There's no school today. No, he said, I promised this kid we'd shoot baskets. And this kid was a special needs kid. And the kid got to the school because they had vans, I guess, that got him there. And I watched him go down the driveway, and I couldn't believe it. He must have fell 3 or 4 times before he figured out if he went in the ditch, he could walk. And he went to school. I'm thinking, wow. And he did. There was maybe 4 people showed up that day. So there was kind of the drive when he wanted to do something was there. But the night of the draft, like, Danny Flynn phoned me and we had met in the summer through these hockey school things, because their team would beat us like 10-1, 10-2. And he says, the McCarty kid, he said, I'm looking at these stats here, and we got him in the 7th, 8th round. He says, I know Peterborough's got a bunch of picks. I mean, I'm sure they're going to probably, and the parents probably want him to play there. And I said, to be honest with you, yeah, I would think that they were figuring he's going to stay here. And he says, well, I need something from you, because we've got 2 fourths. And the phone's quiet, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, what have I just done here? But he said, tell me about this kid. So I told him the ice, the freezing rain story, told him a couple other things where the kid is just, there's something there, something different about him, where he's got this inner drive and this toughness that, and he just loves the game, wants to play. Like, he'd go on the ice and stay on the ice for hours. And I said, you know what, Danny, I said, I grew up in Oshawa, and on our street, we had, my next door neighbor was Terry O'Reilly. The other end of the street was Dave Gorman. We had 2 or 3 generals, Wayne Cashman and one of the Babcocks, billeting in the neighborhood. So he reminds me of O'Reilly, like, except for Terry was like a 90+ student. Darren wasn't in school, but they were similar. They didn't skate well. They would fight anything that moved, but they had a touch around the net that they seemed to be able to get to and put pucks in. Just something off the wall. And he's not talking. I said, you still there? And he says, you know what? He says, my chief scout's the biggest Bruin fan. Like, he's sick Bruin fan. He says, I'm going to tell him this story. So next day we're at the draft in Belleville, grandma, grandpa, me, Darren, like, there's a whole crowd of us. And they've already bought a cottage in Peterborough. They've been coming up from Leamington, staying there when he was playing B, and figured they'll just continue as he plays or tries out for the Petes. and Belleville takes them. Peterborough had, I think, Donnie O'Neill with their first 4th-round pick. I think Belleville took Jake Grimes, but then they had another pick before Peterborough picked the game. They took Darren with the second one in the 4th round. The grandma's crying, the grandpa's crying. I'm going, oh my gosh. And I'm just looking at my brother. I said, don't you say a word about that. I go down there, Danny Flynn hung over. He puts the thumb up. That Bruin story did it. He said, boy. And like I said to him, I said, okay, so Gretzky was your first pick. Darren's your 4th. I said, I bet you McCarty's better than Gretzky in his last year. I mean, just shooting off my mouth, right? Sure enough, he was like CHL Player of the Year. And then, the rest is history with his Stanley Cups and stuff. So
that's absolutely incredible. That entire sequence.
Yeah, it was funny because we don't see him much. I mean, he's been, with his life, I mean, he's good now. It's changed around a whole lot, but he has this company and you can phone him, and one of my daughters talks to him on Twitter or Instagram every once in a while, and they kind of kid each other. And she got him to come on and send me a Father's Day birthday thing on where it was coming. You can watch it on your TV. It was hilarious. And I hadn't talked to him in quite a long time, so it was kind of neat.
That's so cool. And savvy listeners here, Drummy, will be picking up on the fact that we talk about you playing for the Oshawa Generals, and now you're coaching in Peterborough, but also in there, we talked about protecting Wayne Gretzky, who played those games for the Peterborough Petes. It shouldn't be lost on anybody that you were on both ends of what I still say is the best rivalry in the entire Ontario Hockey League. How strange was that for you to switch colors?
Well, it was tough because the company I worked for in Oshawa, and this all kind of made it happen, where the coaching, I was able to go back and forth and coach, where the Mothersill family, they were on the board of directors with John Humphreys as minority owners of the Oshawa Generals. So when the coaching thing came up, and it was the radio guy there that kind of got me, Dave Gilbert guy, he says, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? I said, what do you mean? I'm done work at noon. I'm going home. He says, I got an interview for you. I said, what do you mean an interview? He said, well, the Generals are looking for an assistant coach. I said, I can't do that and work here. He said, oh, yeah, you can. This would be a done deal. So that started it, and never thought I'd get the job. Did, and then it was kind of neat for a few years, and took a year in between and did a tier 2 year in Cobourg. And then the Peterborough thing, I jump in with my old teammate, Dave McQueen, and we had a great first year there, and then he leaves for Tampa, and I was able to be a head coach, never thinking I'd ever coach in that league, never, and be the first ex-Pete's player to coach. And here I am in Oshawa driving around with a Go Pete's Go car, and you couldn't park it at the Civic Auditorium because kids they'd take a key to it and take the paint off. I have to park it a block away and walk over. And the same thing at work, they made me park it at the end of the parking lot, not because it was a Toyota and it's a GM building, because of the Pete stickers all over it. So it was my first year as a head coach in Peterborough, we played Oshawa in the playoffs, and it was unbelievable to come into Oshawa as and do well against that team, because you got to remember they had the Savard years there, and we were good the first year against them. My second year with Billy Stewart there, they beat us in 6, and great series. The series during the season, I think it ended up 7 games to 6 or something for Oshawa. So we were competitive, because those games, they get you fired if you don't do well. And then the late Gary Dell, his first interview with me when I went there, he said, okay, you got to tell me about the GM thing here, because we've got 1,800 people in Peterborough that work in GM. You're from Oshawa. You're in the industry, but not in the plant. You got to tell me what's going on there. I said, it's nuts. He said, what do you do? He said, you played for both teams. You've coached both teams. I said, I do just like I did today at work. Oshawa beat Peterborough 8-2 Friday night, and then came back and beat Ottawa. And my foreman's chirping at me. I said, you guys, that was your first game in a row. You lost 9. And you're all excited because you won 1 game against the Beats. So, and then my buddy's looking at me and said, well, who are you cheering for? I said, I cheer for whoever wins, because, I was on both teams. So it's still there, that rivalry. It's nowhere near like it was in the old days, but It's there still. There's a little bit of bite coming down. And I remember driving Sean Thornton home at night after a Saturday game against the Generals. We'd have to stop in a coffee shop on the 115, and I'd have to make sure he stayed in the car because he would get out and start chirping with Oshawa fans and stuff. I said, Sean, you can't get into any trouble here. We already sent them down the 115 with their tails between their legs, but a lot of times they beat us too. So it was, the rivalry, it was crazy, but I don't know. It's a funny one because my mom and dad are both. My mom is Peterborough, like big family from Peterborough, huge, and I grew up in Oshawa. And Vince Garvey was my mom's cousin. She billeted Iserman. She billeted Keith Acton, Posevad, and Stan Jonathan, like all the old Pete's. And here I am coming in, and Vince, he didn't, he cheered for his guys, but. Two big families from that area, and with me being able to do the sports thing with both of them was kind of neat.
You talked about being an assistant under Dave McQueen. A few things come to mind there because Dave's been on this podcast before too. Let's first talk about him. You said former teammate. That guy was no slouch. He was pretty tough out there too. What was Mac like?
Mac was a character, and how I met him the first time came off the bench. I was a captain in Oshawa, and it was a stupid move, really. But Ben Wilson was running all over the place, and I had told my dad in the afternoon. Says, "Well, you know what? It's time for me to fight him." He said, "Oh, okay. You better have a plan because he'll hurt you if you don't." And yeah, whatever. And I should have listened to him because he did hurt me. But near the end of the fight, we'd both gone down, and I was cut pretty good under the eye, over the eye. I don't know, a couple of different places. And he tried to gouge one. Ben just loses it. He's got that red hair, and he's trying to rip one of my eyes out. And Mac grabbed him and pulled him off me. Like Dave was playing for Ottawa then. So I'm up and I'm looking at, because I know the linesman didn't pull him off, and Dave's trying to calm him down. I'm thinking, good thing he did that, because how would have got hurt worse. So time goes on, we play more games against each other and end up down in the it wasn't the East Coast League. It might have been one of the first years in the coast. So I was under contract to Vancouver, and I was in Utica. He was under contract to Detroit, and he'd had a couple of big time years, like in Sudbury after that, with big goals with Johnstown. So we kind of hit it off. We're talking a little bit, and we played the rest of that year. The next year we trade for him, and he comes our way to Utica, Salem, and ends up, we play 3 years down there together. Actually, he lived with me for 2 of them. He was like a bit, you never seen him hardly because I'm married. He's single. He's gone all the time, but big numbers. Like he just had like a skill to score that was like crazy. And like you said, he was tough, like his dad was. And next thing you know, we're had to go out to the hockey school in Guelph, and everybody knew Peterborough was looking for a coach. And I had no idea Dave was coaching, like coaching St. Mary's Junior Bs or something. And I remember Mike Polino, because we all thought he was going to get the job because he interviewed. And Mike comes up to me and says, Dave McQueen? I said, yeah, really well. Like we were roommates, lived together. We've played against each other for years. He said, he's the new Pete's coach. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, wow. And he had a tough year because I was in Oshawa then as an assistant, and we'd talk back and forth quite a bit. And it was a tough year for him. They didn't win much. The next year they cleaned house in Oshawa, and Stan Butler came in. So Stan gave me the option of staying as a part-time assistant and going in the press box or whatever, but not on the bench. And I said, you know what? I'm good, and had a chance to get some head coaching experience in Tier 2. So I went to Coburg. But that year in the fall, I helped run the Pete's training camp, which probably in the end got me a head coaching job maybe a couple of years later, or for sure got me the assistant job the year after that. So my year in Coburg went well. We lost to Newmarket in the final. And the next year they needed an assistant coach in Peterborough, and the rest is history. We didn't start out great, but man, did we finish great. And it was just, we had great chemistry. And I don't know if that was from playing together or just knowing each other, but it worked out great. I mean, we were a 6th place team to win the OHL and then host the Memorial Cup. Tough one losing in the final game, but a phenomenal year. And then London, Brad Selwood had phoned Jeff Toohey after the season was over because they wanted permission to talk to me because they were going to do a head coaching change there. So I don't know if Brad came in or whoever was there. Paul McIntosh was the GM. So we're all Peterborough guys. And Jeff said, for sure. I mean, I says, I don't know, can Brian work his job? And how's he going to coach in London and still have his job? And next thing you know, Dave says, you know what, you better hang on here because I think I might be going to Tampa. I go, what? Tampa, like in the NHL? He goes, yeah. Like Crispy's kid was our marketing guy, and Terry was at the Memorial Cup, really liked what he saw. He needed another assistant coach. So Dave moved, and then I had a chance to interview for that job, and worked out great. So I didn't have to move and was able to keep my job in Oshawa and kind of just move shifts around and stuff and coach there.
You never did give up that job at GM in all
No.
of your time coaching.
No. And it's a funny, because I remember trying to tell the Peterborough executive, they said, here's the deal. We need you in here by 12:30, 1 o'clock every day. So now they're looking at me. Oh, I can't work and do that. Yeah, no problem. They're going, what do you mean no problem? When are you going to work? I said, I get up we start at 6 in the morning. It's a 3.5 hour shift. We're on a quota. We got to load so many vehicles and we're done. It's all hockey guys. We had 4 or 5 different shifts, and we probably had every Oshawa general for 15 years working there, and some Pete's guys, a lot of lacrosse guys. And any days I needed to travel, I could bump sick days in, or luckily at that time there was a couple of big layoffs in Oshawa in the plant with changeover model stuff coming in and out, so I was able to bump into that. But the day I got fired, and you got to remember, you have 500 guys sitting there watching, making sure you don't get a special deal, because everybody has 2 jobs there. And the day I got fired was a Friday. We were heading to North Bay on the Sunday, and I had no sick days left, no personal days left. I had nothing, and didn't have to worry about it because I got bumped out. So there I am back in, punching in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So no, I kept it for sure. And because I remember a guy telling me at one time, he said, you want to coach? He said, here's what I'm going to give you some advice. You take it. And it was like the late Gilly Hughes from Oshawa said, you're going to lose a lot of friends. He said, parents, they're not going to like you, maybe because you cut their kid. But he said, that's not a big deal. He said, you don't really care about that. But he said, think of it as you're going to the racetrack, and all those kids in there are racehorses. He said, are you going to bet your life on those 20 kids? He said, most unpredictable thing you're going to find out is these kids are so unpredictable, and it's going to be every day will be different, and they'll be all over the place. So if you can keep your job, probably a smart thing. And actually, when I got fired, the guys, the board of directors there, they thought I was like one of their kids, right? They treated you really, really good. They would check up on you to see how you're doing. But I mean, I never missed a day. I was right back to work on that Monday, fired Friday, back Monday. I did have some guys waiting at the time clock to give it to me a little bit, but it was their way of saying, you know what, we feel bad for you. And it's a tough one, but if you lose, you don't win games, you're not going to stay around. So
what is it we say? Coaches get hired to be fired, right?
Well, yeah. Well, my buddy, they have a team in North in the Lake Superior Junior League, and the team's 13-4-2, and they just fired their coach. I said, pardon? And that's Colin Campbell and those guys. I said, you guys kidding me? He said, no, we want a full-time coach. I said, 13, and he was coach of the year in that league last year. Took you guys to the finals last year as a first-year team, and you fired him. I said, wow. That's crazy. I mean, but it is. It's I was lucky enough to get a few years in there at least, and came back and did some tier 2 years. And it's a lot of I don't want to say hardship, but your family has to. I mean, my wife was amazing to let me do that and have that opportunity to take a run at it. Because it's they got to do everything when you're gone, like all the time, and that's a tough one right there. So
those tier 2 years, Drummy, with Coburg, you at least, I mean, I think this is the way you'd want it to be. You get to go out on your own terms, and it's not all that long ago, to be honest with you. I mean, how much do you miss being around the game that much?
You know what, Mike? I not as much as I thought I would. I know all the time I miss with my kids by being, I can never get that back. That's a tough one. to think, was it worth, if you went and coached in the NHL for 10 years after for a few big contracts, you think, okay, it was worth it. But the tier 2 one was nowhere near as busy as the OHL one. But when you're doing everything, it is, because you're drafting, signing, trying to get players, and you're on no money budgets, and that kind of dragged out a little longer maybe than it should have. And I was lucky enough I was able to go out on my terms. We had a real good ownership group here, and they just said, it's yours. You do what you got to do. And other than the odd meeting we'd like to come to, it's yours. And you don't get that very often. I had a good core of people with me helping me. So for the most part, we moved here because of that, and it was a good move to come out of Oshawa, come east this way. So now we're just getting ready to move to PEI. So
Come on.
Yeah, we'll be Gerard Gallant followers.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. My late great colleague Don Cameron, obviously from the island as well, and talks so passionately, not just about the island, but about Gerard. We met him at a Memorial Cup many years ago, and it goes on and on.
You want to hear a story about the Memorial Cup? He showed up in here when we were hosting. So I'd come from work, and Jeff Toohey would pay the $500 fine so we wouldn't have to practice at the Mem Center. We'd come down to Coburg and go in the back rink. Well, Gerard's there with his driver because he's going on his way to Detroit to do the raising of Steve Yzerman's sweater. So he was on a timeline from his wife. His wife was phoning every 3 or 4 hours to see where he was. And so he dropped in here because my owners, they were all from PEI, the Stewart family, all PEI residents. And they want to know if we could get them some tickets for the Saturday game. I think we were playing, that was the Brandon game. We were playing Brandon. I said, you know what? I think I can get some. So I got them tickets. Never, thought anything of it. I come to work on the Monday. We lose the Memorial Cup game on the Sunday. I'm back in Oshawa Monday, and my buddies are all over me. I said, what are you doing? What are you talking about? He says, you put Gerard Gallant and Terry Crisp within about 3 seats of each other. I thought they were going to fight. What I didn't know is they'd sat Gerard his last 8 or 9 games of the regular season, so he wouldn't get a $300,000 bonus. I had no idea that was going on. And Terry that wasn't his call. That was ownership and management call. I mean, he ended up grieving it through the Players Association. I think he got quite a bit of it back, but they said they were going to go right out in the seats. It was like crazy. I put them right together almost. But we're looking forward to moving that way. My sister and brother-in-law have been out there for a year and a bit. And we bought some property out there last year. Of course, the storm and stuff has slowed some stuff down, and the pandemic and everything else. But sooner or later, we'll be there, and we'll be. My builder is a Leaf fan, though. I had to make sure we cleared that up because I figured he might be a Ranger fan, but.
You could even run into Habs down there. That's dangerous territory.
Yeah. There might be more Montreal fans than Toronto fans out there.
Yeah, yes, that's what Don Cameron was too, and he and I still managed to get along somehow.
But we've got off our '96 OHL championship team, I've got 5 guys living on the island. They all went to UPEI, including our captain Adrian Murray, and they're all there. They've married girls from PEI, and they're all out that way, and they love it. So. The winters will be.
They're a little different.
Yeah. But we're looking forward to it. I think it's kind of that's the retirement for us. I retired a couple of years ago when GM shut down, and then went back because it's just it wasn't really a planned retirement. It was a forced one, but. Stayed out for a bit, did some pipeline stuff, and then I went back with the new truck launch in Oshawa. And so far, that's working out good. But I'm not going to be there too much longer, so I probably get a year and a half in or something. That's about it. I've never worked in the plant in my life. We were always outside shipping and putting stuff on trains. And now it's nice and warm in there. You don't get cold. You don't get hurt.
If you had only done that 40 years ago, Drummy.
Yeah, well, that's that's for sure. Where I'm working is like a 35-year seniority job. So, but that's perfect for me because that's where I should be. I'm getting up there.
Absolutely. You talk about that '96 championship team and the guys that are down on the island now. But one name that I wanted to ask about is Cameron Mann, because I hear about him and hear about him and hear about him. And how special a player was he?
Well, he was special, and that he didn't go on and become a real big-time NHL guy might have been because he was a victim of the change in hockey at that time. He if he's there now, he's he's putting up huge numbers because he was so fast and had the good hands. But he had Pat Burns as a coach in Boston. As much as I'm a Pat Burns fan, I think that was probably the worst coach he could have had, because he was the type of kid, and Dave struggled with him. Like, he tried to really, to get the kid going. He saw this talent that this kid had and found that if you just kind of stayed away from him and not coddle him, but be more positive all the time, he would really light it up. And I mean, I was always worried that first year I was in there. I thought, because he had signed the contract with Boston and he couldn't play in Providence because he still had OHL eligibility. But I thought, as soon as the season's done, he's gone. Like Pat says, we're bringing him up. So just so you know, so get ready for that. And we might bring him up even before. And I'm thinking, oh, cripes, how interested is he going to be to play here? First game of the playoffs, he got 7 points against Kingston. I'm going, well, they need to worry about that. But that Memorial Cup, he dominated. Like, he got highlight reel goals. He couldn't have been any better a player, and just a real nice kid too. Like, it's just unfortunate, if maybe Toronto took him or somebody else, it might have worked out better for him. But he put up good numbers in the AHL and then went to Europe and did really well. But he should have been able to play for quite a while, I would think, in the NHL. You never seen a guy that could skate like that, like, unbelievable. And that Memorial Cup, we didn't win, and he was the MVP. So that doesn't happen very often either. So.
Exactly. How tough was it? I mean, you mentioned it was a sixth place team. Your hosts, though, you win your way through the playoffs, right? So you're OHL champs, you're there, and then on home ice, you win that game against Brandon in the semis. Yeah. I think it was overtime too, wasn't it? Either way, it was 1 goal.
Yep. 2-1, yeah. 2-1 with a late goal. A Cameron Mann late goal with about maybe a minute and 20 seconds left in the third period. Yeah.
Yeah. And then into the final, and obviously it doesn't go your way. Granby, I guess, got it that year. But what was that like at the PMC on the home ice after the season you'd had, that championship game? Yeah.
Well, you know what? I can remember when the day they announced that we were going to host, and our executive were in a meeting at the rink, and they came out and they're jumping around all excited. And we're skating around, we're thinking, we don't even need to win another game the rest of the year. But we were in the Memorial Cup. So that's kind of not really your aim, but I thought our general manager, Jeff Toohey, he had a meeting with us, and we tossed a couple of things around. One was moving our big PEI defenseman, the Murphy kid, who was like a pillar in our dressing room, or at least bring him in and give him a chance to move, because he wasn't playing much. And I said to him, well, I'm going to give you a little story of what happened to us in Oshawa one year. We traded Joe Cook to Owen Sound, and Joe Cook was like a Jonathan Murphy type guy. He might get 5 points for the whole season, but in the room, he was unbelievable. He was like another coach, a parent to these kids, and he could play. He'd play, and I said, when we moved him, our team went right to tank. I said, just make sure, bring the kid in. Let's see what he thinks. Kid didn't want to go anywhere. And they had a couple draft picks to move him. And that's, I just saying, that's 2 picks. And we already committed but I said, we committed to these kids that we weren't going to rebuild this team because we're hosting. We're going to start playing 4 lines. We're going to play all our picks. We're going to roll 4 lines and just see what happens. We picked up Eric Landry from Guelph, who was a gutsy third line kid that just was phenomenal for us. That's it. And a local kid, the Jones kid that was playing junior B, weighed about $150, ended up being one of our best defensemen. And that was it. We didn't load up. Granby, they loaded 2 teams to come to the Memorial Cup. So I don't know. The Murphy kid got one of the biggest goals in our season. I remember Dave in Guelph, and it's he was pacing back and forth. It was 3-2 Guelph after 1, and goals were going in. They had Cloutier in net for Guelph, and we had Zach Burke, 2 of the best goalies in the league, and neither of them could stop a beach ball that game. It was unbelievable how bad they were. Goals going in, and Dave's looking at me. He says, "What are we going to do?" I says, "Well, you can't pull Berkey because our backup hasn't played in like 4 months, so that's not going to happen." And he's going, "Oh shit!" I said, "This is going to be like a 7-6, 8-7 game." He says, "Better better not be like, oh, he's losing it. Like, he just says, make sure you watch your D. And I don't want to see Murphy out there on a power play. So anyway, had a whole bunch of defensemen in the penalty box. And this is like, it's 5-5 or 6-5 for Guelph in the third. So I go, Murph, you're out. He says, it's a power play. I said, doesn't matter. I have no other defenseman. Like, you're going. He lobs one from the blue line. If it doesn't hit about 4 guys on the way through and go in, his first goal of the year, like his first goal in 2 years. Our bench empties. Like, they were almost going to give us a penalty for that. They went crazy. Like, he ties it 6-6. And Dave's looking at me. He says, how did he get out there? I said, I don't have any defensemen. They're all in the penalty box. And then we go on the win in overtime, which was just like, oh my gosh. Like, and then with the defenseman scoring too, like Martone scoring in overtime. So it was, the city put on such a real good job of hosting, and with us there, I think made it even easier for them to get the people in the rink. And for us, it was just like we're on a cloud. And to think that we lost in that final game, I just thought it was a done deal. We're going to win no matter what, because we're destined to win. And sure enough, no, the hockey god said, no, you really got to win. So, and the French team, we'd played them earlier and beat them, but they were a good team. They had 40 and 50 goal guys on their fourth line. So they had some really good players, and it's the way it went. And just one of those things, Berkey got us there, and he had a tough last game. Our whole team did, really. And because the Brandon game, we had to go in the tank to win that one. And when we were going through after the game, looking at our ice times of Kevin Bollebrook and Mike Martone, our two big, and Adrian Murray played almost 30 minutes. Dave just looked at me and says, we're in trouble. And I said, well, maybe not. Like, I mean, you don't know for sure, but there's not enough time to recoup physically, that's for sure. He says, what are we going to do? He said, Bollebrook's never played 2 games in a row with more than 25 minutes. He goes right in the tank in the second game. He said, Murray might be okay. Martone's never played more than 22 minutes. He got him at 26 minutes. But we had to do that to win. Sure enough, the next day, we didn't have a whole lot of anything left, really. And the French team played well. So.
Mike Martone, his son's coming through the league now with Sarnia Porter.
I hear that. I hear he's a good player. A really good player.
Yeah.
So that's good for him. They're such a nice family. And Mike, I mean, he was my captain the first year I coached. So just a quality guy. Probably one of my favorite players I ever coached there, for sure. And to see he's got kids coming, that means we're old.
Well, I was just going to say that. I shouldn't have brought it up, Drummy. I'm sorry, but
yeah.
Jeff Tuohy's name has come up a couple of times, and if you're talking about the Peterborough Petes, it's hard for that name to not come up. I sent him a note, let him know we were about to have this chat. He said nobody could sleep on a bus like Drummy. Why would he say a thing like that?
Well, because I had to go to work when I got home, where those guys got to go to bed. But that was one thing they used to have contests when I played to see either how quick I had a hot bath when we got into the hotel room or how soon I got to sleep. And in the American Hockey League, somebody won $50. I was asleep in the parking lot before we got out. But you could sleep. I mean, I would bring foam, put it on the floor between the seats, and make like a little cot, and I'd be out. These guys sit there in their seats, sitting up for 5-hour bus trips, and wonder why the next day they're like, I've had a really good night's sleep. But that's funny. Jeff remembers that because he's at the front with us, and he says, "Where's Drummy going?" Dave says, "He's there down there. He's asleep." He goes, "What? You're kidding me?" He said, No, he's got his mattress or his foam, and he curls it up, and he said he's got to go to work like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. He goes, "Oh, geez." But Jeff could never do that. He had to sit up and rehash the game because that's what GMs do, right? And he had trouble sleeping on the bus, and he could hear me snoring.
When you look back on it all, Drummy, and we kind of started this by talking about the mark you left on the game that'll never be taken away. You played as a 14-year-old in the Ontario Hockey League. It'll never happen again. Playing for the Memorial Cup on home ice when you're coaching in Peterborough, drafted by the Vancouver Canucks. You mentioned some time in the coast, etc. Do you have a highlight when you think back on all of these decades in the game?
Boy, that's a tough one. You know what? I think the day I got traded to Peterborough might have been probably a day that I look back on. And I remember Sherry Basson calling me in, and we'd just beaten London, and I wanted to finish my career in Oshawa, and we weren't very good. I think that was our second win in 14 games, and I'm the captain. And he said, you know what? He says, hell of a game out there tonight. And I said, yeah, that's unreal that we beat that team, and that maybe that'll get us going. He said, if I was going to trade you, okay, I'm going to give you a scenario. Would you like to go to the Hamilton Finn Cups and play for Bert, or go to the Peterborough Petes and play for Gary Green? I mean, it was a quick answer because my mom's family was so much embedded in that community. And right away I said Peterborough, and right away he said, well, that's good because we traded you there. I said, when? He said, well, it was about an hour and a half ago. And later in the year, Hamilton tried to get me out of Peterborough because McCourt needed a left winger. They wanted a big, tough guy on the left side that would play with him, and they were willing to move a 50-goal guy. I'm thinking, are you guys crazy? Like, I'm not going to get 50 goals, but they needed that type of guy on his line. And I remember Gary saying, he said, you never would go there, would you? I said, no, I like, this is where I want to be, and this is a big highlight for me to be here and walk around in this rink and look at stuff on the wall and that. I mean, you know, it was a big deal. So I'd have to say that trade day, and probably my first game there, you know, I mean, I played a lot of years in Oshawa, and we never had anywhere near the success that we did in Peterborough. It's a totally different scenario going from one city to the other, but I think to be able to play for both of them is kind of neat too. But the day I got traded there was huge. And it might be followed real close by when Jeff gave me the opportunity to coach there too, because that was his call pretty much. And, you know, we got real close in that Memorial Cup year, and for him to give me that opportunity, that was a big deal.
How'd you ever get used to playing with those damn square corners in Peterborough?
Well, yeah, they were good place to stop for guys like me and Brubaker. We used them to stop, crash into them. I think the way it worked, if you get the puck up in there, it's fine. If you don't, it'll come right out in front of the net. That was the big deal. But it was always a tough rink to go in and play, like real tough. I always would be excited just to go there to play, because I knew some of our big guys, they would have bad games in there and I might get some extra ice time. But if you got the puck up, it would travel around almost like a circle corner. But tell you, if it's off at all, it comes straight out. It'll come right out into the high slot. So you can just wait there and maybe get some real good chances. But I remember sitting with Darren in there one night, and he dragged me in there after a night shift. I says, Darren, like, I want to go to sleep. He says, yeah, but we can skate for an hour. He says, you can do some cardio. I'm going to just work on my shot, because we had the keys to go in, right? And we go in there, and we're sitting there in the seats. And I said to him, look around, and all the lights are out in there. It's kind of eerie. And I said, more players have come out of this rink into the National Hockey League than any rink in the world. And he's sitting there looking around, and he says, wow. I said, this is like, and that's a true stat. I mean, at that time, more players drafted and more players had played coming out of this rink right here. So something for you to think about. And he says, yeah, well, I want to go down and shoot. He said, I want to be really sitting here listening to you. But yeah, it's a phenomenal stat, and their history. Unfortunately, the small teams that are really in the OHL now, it's such a business, and the little places like Peterborough, and I don't want to say Sudbury, and it's for sure not you guys, but are really, you know, finding it hard to get 3,000 and 4,000 people in. I mean, we go into Oshawa, like there's like 4,000 or 5,000 there the other night, and they lost 9 games in a row.
Yeah,
you wouldn't get that in most places until you got some more wins up there. So business is tough, that's for sure, right?
Before I let you go, you just made me think of something else when you're talking about all those players that came out of Peterborough, and still one of the organizations that has graduated the most, even to this day. But you had a decent track record of that too in your tier 2 time as a coach and a GM, developing players for the next level. And I don't think that should be overlooked.
Well, we took, and I used to say that to my owners, we took a lot of pride in, and I used to get into it with Branchy. David used to listen to us on our TV shows in Peterborough, and I knew he'd go to sleep usually about second period. So I could get away with sneaking some NCAA stuff in there, or OHL versus NCAA, or, you know, I think that guy should have dropped the gloves and fought there type of thing, because he'd be ready. You get an email right away, and he'd say, Drummy can't say that. I can't say that. But when we were here, we moved over 50 kids to the NCAA, and we had 62 or 63 go to the OHL. So I used to say, Dave, I said, it's a split down the middle. And I said, you got to remember, when these kids come in here, their agents have them redlined either south to school or north to the OHL. So unless something can change from your end, and that's when, the school programs were changing, the school, year for year, you were getting guaranteed schooling. And what a move by David to do that. I mean, it's not that I preferred the NCAA. My job when I talked to parents was get your kid what's best for your kid. If it's going to school, it's going to school. If it's playing in the O, it's playing in the O. And I don't know, I had a battle with George Burnett, and he says, I want Chris Petro. And he says, I know you guys are in first place, and that might cost you first place. And I said, done deal. And he said, pardon? I said, well, Chris's mom passed away in the fall. Last thing I said to his mom and dad was, if I can get him to Oshawa with a school package, he's going. If he can't get a school package, he's going to Michigan State. So he's got a no-win situation. And then what did George say to me? He says, I suppose you're going to want a development fee too. And I said, oh yeah. And skates. I need some skates, a size 10.5 and about 2 dozen sticks too. And he's just shaking his head. Him and Donnie Meehan and was his agent as well as Chris's. So he knew he couldn't do anything, but we never pushed either one direction or the other. So, I mean, got to remember, in the old days, we didn't have that opportunity to get the schooling that's guaranteed now out of, from these junior teams in the Ontario Hockey League that these kids get now. So it was close. It was almost right down the middle. So when Dave would always bring it up, he says, you can't be talking about that NCAA like that. He said, this is the Ontario Hockey League. You're on an Ontario Hockey League broadcast. I said, yeah, but it's not my broadcast. I'm the guest, kind of like I'm the color guy. So, but I knew when he'd go to sleep, and sometimes he'd play it back. And if he didn't like something, I'd get an email. But then he says, you're right. Like, I checked the stats on your kids. You're right on. Like, more went to the O, but very, very minimal more. But I said, David, that's their direction, their choice. We just coach them, teach them, and hope that they get that opportunity. That's all we can provide. So.
I'll tell you what, Drummy, I want this one. I think it could go on all night, but there's an old rule that you would know from doing your time in broadcasting too. Always leave them wanting more. So we'll plan for a sequel once you get settled into PEI. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds great. You have to get Jeff and I on together. That would be kind of a fun one, I think.
Okay, I can absolutely do. Jeff's one of my favorite guys in this game, so that should be fun.
Oh, we got some good stories. Even when he had to fire me, that was kind of not comical, but it's just, it's the way it went. It's business. But you know what?
What's your version of that story? I wonder if it's different than his.
Well, I think I was a little pouty at first, for sure. I mean, first call I made was to my wife, and then second one to Rick Kornacki, who's a close coaching mentor. But Jeff was good. Like, one of the directors came in and kind of said which way they were going, and Jeff could have left, but he didn't. He came right in, sat in there with me, and we chatted a little bit about what had happened in the last couple of years, and not so much what was going on then. And they were going to let him coach, and he wasn't sure. I mean, he always wanted to coach, so I think he was excited about that, but he didn't feel excited about what was happening to me. So he could have left. And he didn't. So I always had a lot of respect for the guy. I mean, he's known him forever. So, and he stayed in there, and I thought that was kind of neat because he didn't have to do that, because I had to clean out all this junk I had all over the place in my office, and he's trying to help me. And it's like, what do you say, right? But that's a long time ago, and everything happens for a reason. And it was kind of fun when it lasted. When you have success there, it's a lot of fun, but that's the way it goes.
Well, it'll be Drummy and Tui for part 2 of this for sure.
Yeah, sounds good, Michael.
Brian, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yep. Say hi to Mac down there in Kitchener, eh?
I will absolutely do that for you.
Yeah, his family, they're good friends. Him and his dad and me are pretty good friends. So
I'll pass it along for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Drummy. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.